My daughter-in-law, Debbie, smiled that sweet smile of hers during the video call with my son, Frank. But when the screen went dark, she leaned close to my ear, her whisper as cold as the Wyoming wind. This blizzard, it's God answering my prayers. And that's when I knew. The storm raging outside my window was nothing compared to the one inside my own home. Its howling seemed only to drown out the suffocating silence in this room. I am 76 years old, and this is the story of my last days, or at least what my daughter-in-law had planned for them to be. It's not an easy story to hear, but it's the truth. And I believe the truth, no matter how painful, deserves to be heard. But first, wherever you're listening to this, whether it's in your favorite armchair or on a long drive, would you do an old woman a favor? Please give this video a like, or maybe leave a short comment below just so I know I'm not alone. The O'Connell Ranch is no place for the faint of heart. My husband, John, used to say that all the time, usually with a wry smile as he came in from the cold, stamping snow from his boots. The wind out here in Wyoming can grind down stone, and the winters can freeze the loneliest of souls. But I loved it. I loved the way the morning sun would stretch across the pastures, finding the frost on every blade of grass and making it glitter. I loved the familiar rhythmic creak of the porch swing John built for me 40 years ago. I can still remember the afternoon he finished it, the air smelling of freshly cut pine. He'd wiped his hands on his jeans and said, "All right, Margaret, your throne is ready." We sat on it together until the stars came out, not saying much, just existing together. That was the best kind of conversation with John. After the accident, my world shrank to the view from this window, and that swing sat empty, a silent testament to a life I could no longer live. My son, Frank, he's a petroleum engineer, has to work way out in Texas. The distance eats at him. I can hear it in his voice. He worries about me something awful. And when he told me his wife, Debbie, was going to quit her job in town to come and take care of me full time, I felt a wave of relief so profound, it almost brought me to tears. I felt like the luckiest mother in the world. "She's an angel, Mom," Frank would say over the phone, his voice filled with gratitude. And in the beginning, I believed it too. Debbie was a flurry of activity. She brought me soup, read me clippings from the newspaper, and was always asking, "Do you need anything, Mom?" I thought, God is so merciful. He took my legs, but he sent me this kind woman. But sometimes the worst things don't come at you with horns and a pointed tail. They don't announce themselves with thunder and lightning. They come with a gentle smile and a warm bowl of chicken soup. It all started so reasonably, so logically, that I never saw it coming. "Mom Margaret," Debbie said one morning, her voice sweet as honey poured over a biscuit, "why don't you let me hold on to your bank card? It'll be easier for groceries and paying the utility bills. You won't have to worry about a thing." It made perfect sense to me. This wheelchair tethers me to the house, a prisoner of my own home, and I trusted her. I saw her as family, as Frank's wife. I handed her the card, along with the pin that only John and I had ever known. It felt like a small surrender, but a necessary one. The first week, everything was fine. Debbie came back from Costco with bags full of groceries, including the expensive chamomile tea I like, the one with the real flowers in the bag. But then I started noticing little things, little inconsistencies that pricked at the edges of my comfort. The monthly bank statement, the one I'd always balanced myself at John's old oak desk, just stopped showing up. When I asked about it, Debbie just laughed it off, a tinkling sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, I forgot. I must have misplaced it somewhere. It's all just a bunch of boring numbers anyway, Mom. The way she said boring numbers sent a little chill down my spine. To me, they weren't just numbers. They were rows of cotton John and I had picked, calves we'd nursed through hard winters, and years of scrimping and saving. They were our entire life of work. They were my security. Then came the imaginary repair bills. The plumber was here yesterday, Mom, Debbie announced over a dinner of canned soup, her voice bright and efficient. He said the whole system under the kitchen is about to go. Had to replace it. I was surprised. John had put in all new copper piping just 5 years back, a job he was immensely proud of. It'll outlast both of us, he'd said. I hadn't heard a thing, hadn't seen a strange truck in the drive. They came while you were napping, she explained quickly, her eyes focused on sorting the mail. The next week, it was the roofer, who apparently found a legion of leaks I'd never noticed in 50 years of spring thaws. After that, it was the termite specialist. This house, which had stood like a fortress against decades of Wyoming weather, was suddenly riddled with ailments. My savings, my nest egg, were draining away to pay for its imaginary illnesses. I felt a profound sense of helplessness, like watching a slow leak in a boat. I'd asked to see the invoices, but Debbie always had a plausible excuse. I left it in the car, I'll get it later, or they send them electronically now, Mom. It's all paperless. You wouldn't be able to see it. I knew something was wrong deep in my bones. But what could I do? I was an old woman in a wheelchair and she controlled everything. The deepest cut, the one that truly signaled the person I was dealing with, came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the living room trying to lose myself in a book when I heard an unfamiliar engine rumbling outside, loud and diesel-powered. I wheeled myself to the window and my heart just stopped. 2 men were winching my husband's old John Deere tractor onto the back of a flatbed truck. That wasn't just a machine. It was the last big piece of him I had left. I could still see the day John drove it home, his grin wider than the Wyoming sun, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He taught Frank how to drive on that very tractor, our son barely big enough to see over the steering wheel. I still have the photographs tucked away in an album. Debbie, what is going on? I called out, my voice cracking, thin with panic. Debbie walked in, wiping her hands on a dish towel, looking completely unfazed. I sold it. Got a good price for that old piece of junk. It was just taking up space in the barn anyway. A piece of junk? I whispered the words. They felt like ash in my mouth. She didn't understand, or she refused to. She was selling my memories, my husband's legacy, for a few dollars. As the truck carrying my piece of junk disappeared down the long dirt road, leaving a gaping, sorrowful hole in the barn and in my heart, I just stared at her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her what a cruel, thoughtless thing she had done. But my voice was trapped behind a wall of grief and shock. All I could manage to ask, in a trembling voice, was, "How much?" She shrugged, a dismissive, careless gesture. "A few $100, enough to cover the internet bill this month." A few $100. An entire lifetime of memories. The golden afternoons Frank and his father spent tinkering with that engine, their heads bent together in concentration, the smell of grease and hay in the air, all of it was worth 1 month of internet. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept drifting back to the Great Recession in 2008. John and I had lost nearly half of our retirement savings overnight. We had to work 5 more grueling years than we'd planned, just to feel safe again. We learned then that the value of things isn't in the money, it's in the permanence, in what the stock market can't take away from you. And now my daughter-in-law was teaching me another lesson, a much more bitter one. In her world, everything had a price tag, even the soul of a dead man. Debbie thought I had given up. After the tractor incident, I was silent for 2 whole days. A heavy, oppressive quiet filled the house. I ate what she gave me, took the pills she handed me, and didn't ask a single question. She probably thought she had finally broken me, that she'd crushed the last of my spirit. But she was wrong. We Wyoming folk don't break that easily. We bend, we weather the storm, but we don't break. That night, long after the ranch had settled into a deep quiet, with only the wind whistling through the eaves like a mournful song, I willed myself into John's study. The room still held his scent, the faint, comforting smell of his pipe tobacco and old wood and paper. I reached for the small leather-bound ledger on his desk. It was our old household expense book, something I'd stopped using after he passed because the entries felt too lonely. I opened it to the first clean page. With a hand that trembled from arthritis, I carefully wrote down the date. Then I wrote, Tuesday, sold John's tractor. I didn't know what I would do with these notes. I had no plan. But in that moment, writing down the truth, even if it was just for me to see, was my way of holding on to myself. It was my way of telling myself, Margaret, you are not crazy. You are still here. Every Sunday the ritual would begin. Debbie would come into my room early, not with her usual sullen, resentful face, but with a smile so bright it was painful to look at. Frank's calling today, Mom, she'd chirp, her voice a songbird's. We have to look our best. She would brush my hair, a little too roughly, and pick out my nicest blue sweater, the one Frank had given me for Christmas. She'd spritz a little lavender water in the air, a scent I now associated with deceit. She'd tidy the room, place a vase of freshly picked wildflowers on the nightstand, and prepare a tray with a hearty-looking meal, usually the cream of chicken soup and toasted bread she knew was Frank's favorite thing for me to eat. The room, under her hands, was transformed from my prison cell into a perfect stage set for the role of loving family. And I, in my wheelchair, was the unwilling lead actress. I knew it was all just props. The vase of flowers would be tossed the moment the call ended, and that fragrant tray of soup, I wouldn't get a single taste. It was there for the camera, and the camera alone. Hello, my boy, I'd say, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster as Frank's dear face appeared on the laptop screen. He looked tired, a little thin, and the lines of worry around his eyes seemed deeper. A familiar ache tightened in my chest. Hi, Mom. Hi, honey, he'd say, his face lighting up in that way that always made my heart swell. You're looking great, Mom. Debbie would be sitting beside me, an arm draped lovingly, possessively over my shoulder. Of course she is, sweetie. Your mom is a fighter, she'd coo, her voice impossibly sweet. I'm taking real good care of her. I even made her favorite soup today. Frank would let out a visible sigh of relief, a sound that traveled thousands of miles to stab me in the heart. Thanks, Debbie. I don't know what I'd do without you. I heard those words and tasted bile in my mouth. My son, my pride and joy, was being so thoroughly and cruelly deceived. He was watching a play, and he believed every word of it. All I could do was nod and offer short, clipped responses that wouldn't betray the tremor in my voice. I'm fine. Don't you worry. Everything's all right. Each lie was a little splinter driving itself deeper into my heart. There was one thing Frank's camera could never see. It was what happened underneath the heavy wool blanket Debbie always draped over my lap. While one of her hands was affectionately patting my shoulder for the screen, the other, hidden from view, would be pinching my upper arm hard. The pain was sharp and searing, a brutal punctuation to her sweet words, but I didn't dare make a sound. It was a warning. A cruel reminder to keep smiling, to act happy, to stick to the script. One time, I almost broke. I saw a flicker of doubt in Frank's eyes and I thought, now. I took a deep breath, ready to say, Frank, son, things aren't right. Instantly, I felt Debbie's fingernails dig into my flesh, a pain so sharp it stole my breath and brought tears to my eyes. I looked at her, and in her eyes, I saw a cold, silent threat that promised worse if I spoke. I swallowed the truth back down, the words lodging in my throat like stones. I replaced them with a wobbly smile. I'm just a little emotional, son. I miss you so much. The calls usually lasted about 15 minutes. 15 minutes of exquisite torture. I love you, Mom, Frank would say before signing off. I love you too, I'd whisper, and it was the only true thing I said the entire time. The instant the computer screen went black, the performance ended. The smile vanished from Debbie's face as if it had been wiped clean. The hand on my shoulder dropped away as if it had touched something dirty and hot. She'd stand up and, without a word, take the tray of still steaming soup and walk out. A few moments later, I'd hear her dump the entire contents into the kitchen trash can with a wet, final thud. The blanket would be roughly pulled off my lap. The room would return to its cold, silent state. I would sit there, alone, feeling the dull throb in my arm and a hot wave of shame rising in my chest. I was an accomplice to my own tormentor. I had lied to my own son. And that pain, the pain of that betrayal, was far worse than any pinch she could deliver. When she wasn't performing for Frank, Debbie didn't need to pinch me. She had a much sharper, more insidious weapon: her words. Who do you think you are? The Queen of England? She'd sneer one evening when my trembling hands caused me to spill a few drops of water. You're nothing but a burden, a useless mouth to feed. These things weren't shouted in anger, which might have been easier to bear. They were spoken calmly, coldly, almost casually, which is what made them so terrifying. She didn't just want me to hurt, she wanted me to believe I deserved it. If it wasn't for me, she'd often say, looking at me with a mixture of pity and contempt, you'd be rotting in this house alone. You should be grateful. Slowly, insidiously, like water dripping on a stone, those words began to seep in. In the lonely hours of the afternoon, I would start to question myself. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was a burden. The erosion of the soul is a far more terrible thing than any physical torture. On the long, sleepless nights, when the pain in my hip was a gnawing fire and Debbie's words echoed in the darkness of my room, I did the only thing I could. I prayed. I've never been a devoutly religious woman, not the kind to go to Bible study every week, but faith was what got me through John's passing and the harshest Wyoming winters. It was a quiet, personal thing. I didn't pray for God to rescue me. I just prayed for strength. The strength to endure one more day, one more performance. I remembered a sermon from Pastor David back at our little church in Cody. He was talking about the story of Job, a man who lost everything but his faith. Sometimes, he'd said, his voice filling the small sanctuary, God doesn't lighten your burden. He just makes your shoulders stronger. I'd close my eyes and picture my own shoulders. They were bony and sore, but I could feel some invisible, stubborn force holding them up. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, just for tonight, I wouldn't break. The way she turned familiar objects into props for her play was frightening. I would stare at that blue sweater she picked for me and wonder, have any of you ever had a favorite item of clothing, a comfortable shirt, or a pair of shoes, that suddenly became tied to an unhappy memory? I'd be grateful to hear your story in the comments. After the Sunday performances came a crueler game, one aimed directly at my mind. Debbie began to deny things I knew had happened, with a chilling sincerity. I never said that, she'd say when I brought up a promise she'd made. On Monday morning, I was certain I'd heard her say over breakfast that she would call the pharmacy to refill my pain medication. The ache in my hip was becoming a constant roar. But that afternoon, when I asked, she looked at me with a frighteningly genuine surprise. You must be mistaken, Mom, she said, her voice full of sweet manufactured concern. You must have been dreaming again. I said I'd call tomorrow. She said it with such absolute conviction that I began to doubt myself. Had I dreamed it? Had my memory really gotten that bad? My own familiar room began to feel strange, as if the walls were closing in, and memories I once thought were as solid as the Wyoming mountains now felt as fragile as morning mist. She wasn't just controlling my body, she was waging a war for my past, trying to conquer the very territory of my mind. At the same time, the physical pain was getting steadily worse. Debbie started forgetting to give me my pain medication on time. The deep, grinding ache from my arthritis and the old injury from my accident became a constant gnawing presence. At first, I thought it was just forgetfulness, a side effect of her being so busy. But it happened too often to be an accident. The timing was too perfect. Debbie, honey, it's time for my pills, I'd say, my voice weak from the effort of fighting the pain. She would glance at the clock on the mantel, then at me, and shake her head with a look of pity. Not yet, Mom. It's only 3 o'clock. You're confused again. But I knew. I could feel the time and the escalating agony of my own body. She was weaponizing my pain, using it as a tool, as proof to prove I was senile, that I couldn't trust my own senses anymore. I would lie there, biting my lip against the waves of it, feeling like I was adrift on an ocean of hurt with no land in sight. The meals became another form of torture, a daily reminder of my powerlessness. No more chicken soup, no more fresh toast. Instead, it was bowls of thin, watery soup, always lukewarm, with a grayish, unappetizing color. A few slices of stale, hard bread I couldn't possibly chew with my old teeth. I'm just so busy. I don't have time for fancy cooking, she'd claim with a sigh. But I knew she was lying. In the evenings, I could smell the rich, savory aroma of roast beef or fried chicken wafting up from the kitchen, the dinner she was making for herself. The hunger pangs would make me remember the hearty stews John used to make in the winter. The smell of beef and carrots and potatoes would fill the whole house, a smell of warmth and love and safety. Now, the food I received was filled only with indifference. She wasn't just starving my body of nutrients, she was deliberately starving my spirit, systematically draining my strength, one miserable, tasteless meal at a time. I thought constantly about calling Frank, not to tell on her, not to cause trouble, but just to hear his voice, to find a little warmth in my cold world. But one afternoon, while Debbie was out in the garden, I managed to will myself to the old rotary phone in the living room. It sat on a small table, covered in a thin layer of dust. I lifted the heavy black receiver. There was no dial tone, just a dead, empty silence. I tried again, jiggling the hook, but it was useless. When Debbie came back inside, I asked her about it. "Oh, the line must be down again," she said without even looking at me, busying herself with a stack of magazines. "Probably the wind yesterday. I'll call a repairman tomorrow." Here in Wyoming, phone lines going down in bad weather was a common thing. Her lie was perfect, unprovable. She had cut my last lifeline to the outside world. The O'Connell Ranch was now well and truly an island, and I was its only prisoner, under the watch of a merciless, silent warden. I was beginning to believe I really was losing my mind. The gaslighting was working. I felt adrift, untethered from my own reality. But then, one morning, a small accident saved me. As Debbie was tidying up my room, she dropped her purse. A few things scattered across the floor: lipstick, keys, a wallet. A small slip of paper fluttered under my wheelchair. She hastily scooped everything up and left, muttering about being clumsy. After she was gone, I bent down with great difficulty, my joints screaming in protest, and picked it up. It was an ATM withdrawal slip from the Wind River Casino, a 2-hour drive from here. The date on it was yesterday, the day she told me she was just going to the market in town. My hand trembled as I held it. There it was, proof, a flimsy little piece of paper, but it was more solid and real than any word she had spoken in months. I wasn't crazy. My memory wasn't failing me. I carefully folded the receipt and tucked it deep beneath the cushion of my wheelchair. It became my secret, my anchor to reality. That night, I reached for John's ledger again. By the faint light of my bedside lamp, I wrote it all down. My hand was stiff, the pencil felt foreign and clumsy, but I forced the words onto the page. Wednesday, no pain medication this afternoon. Pain bad. Thursday, Debbie lied about casino, found receipt. Friday, phone is dead. Each entry was a brick, building a small secret shelter for my truth emphatic against her storm of lies. The writing was difficult. My arthritic hands were stiff and painful, but with every line I completed, I felt a little stronger, a little more myself. Debbie could take my money, my health, and my freedom. She could try to take my memories, but she couldn't take the truth. This book wasn't just a journal anymore. It was my testimony. It was my voice. And I would keep writing until I no longer could. A new kind of pain began, one that was different from the others. It wasn't the dull, familiar ache of arthritis. This was a sharp, persistent, burning pain on my lower back, right on my tailbone, where my body pressed against the hard seat of the wheelchair all day long. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. A hot spot on my skin that felt raw and angry. "Debbie," I said one afternoon, my voice quiet, "I think there's something wrong with my back. It really hurts. Could you take a look?" Debbie glanced at me over her shoulder, her face a mask of impatience. "Hurting again, Mom? At your age, something's always hurting," she dismissed, turning back to her phone. "You're probably just stiff." But I knew this wasn't stiffness. This was something worse. This was the beginning of a bed sore, a sign that my body was beginning to break down from the outside, a physical manifestation of the constant pressure and the neglect I was enduring day after day. My world was getting smaller, shrinking with each passing day. Before, at least once a day, I would see a friendly face. Tom, our mailman. He's been on this route for 30 years, and he'd always drive his dusty Jeep right up to the porch, give 2 short honks, and hand me the mail with a joke about the weather. It was a small thing, a 2-minute interaction, but it was a connection. But this past week, that changed. I saw Tom's familiar Jeep stop way out at the iron gate by the highway. Debbie was already out there waiting for him. She took the bundle of mail, waved him off quickly, and walked back. Tom didn't even honk. I haven't seen his weathered, smiling face up close since. Debbie had erected an invisible wall around my home, blocking out even that last little ray of human connection. Now, I couldn't even count on the kindness of a stranger. It wasn't just the outside world being cut off. My world inside the house was shrinking too. Debbie started restricting me to my bedroom. "You just stay in here, Mom. It's easier for me to keep an eye on you," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Rolling around in the living room, you might fall. That would be a hassle." The living room, with John's big, comfortable armchair where he used to read the paper, the kitchen where that I'd cooked thousands of family meals, the heart of our home. All those places, brimming with a lifetime of memories, were now off limits. I could only see them through a cracked open door, like glimpses into a life that was no longer mine. I felt like a ghost, haunting a single room of the house I had helped build. I existed, but I no longer truly lived here. I was just an object to be moved from the bed to the chair and back again. The passive neglect was now turning into active, casual torture. The most basic acts of care became opportunities for her to inflict pain. When she changed my clothes, her fingers would press down hard on the developing sore on my back, a jolt of agony so intense I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. When she washed me, her movements were rough and hurried, scraping my thin skin. Tears would well up in my eyes, partly from the pain, partly from the profound humiliation of it all. "What's wrong with you? Acting like a baby," she'd say, her voice dripping with contempt. I realized a horrifying truth in those moments. She enjoyed hurting me. My pain seemed to give her some sort of dark satisfaction, a feeling of power. The hands that were meant to comfort and care had become instruments of torment. To escape the crushing reality of my present, I turned to the old photographs on my nightstand. They were my only portal to a better time. There was a black and white photo of John and me on our wedding day, both of us so young and shy and full of a quiet hope for the future. There was a picture of little Frank, his face smudged with grease, sitting on John's lap in the cab of the tractor, pretending to steer. I would stare at them for hours, trying to will myself back into those moments. But as my health failed, so did my eyesight. The beloved faces began to blur at the edges. The happy smiles grew fuzzy and indistinct. It terrified me. It felt as if Debbie wasn't just erasing me in the present, but her cruelty was reaching back like a malevolent shadow into my past, fading the most precious memories I had left. I knew I couldn't just sit here and wait to die. A spark of the old Margaret, the one who ran a ranch and raised a son, was still alive inside me. I had to do something. One afternoon, while Debbie was outside hanging laundry, her back to the house, I made my move. I tore a small page from my ledger. With a worn-down pencil, my fingers stiff and clumsy, I shakily wrote 2 words: "Help me." Each letter took all the strength and concentration I had. Then I wheeled myself to the front window, the one overlooking the long dirt road. With a monumental effort that sent a shock of pain through my entire body, I pushed myself up and wedged the note in the window frame, hoping it would stick. Maybe the Amazon delivery guy would see it. Maybe a lost driver would notice. It was a faint hope, almost no hope at all. A message in a bottle thrown into a vast, empty ocean. But it was all I had. It was my silent scream, a final, desperate act to show the world that I had not yet given up. I would just stare out at that empty dirt road, praying for a car to pass. The isolation is a terrible thing. I wonder, have any of you ever felt so alone in your own home that a simple trip to a store like the Home Depot or Lowe's felt like an exciting event, just to see other faces? Let me know your thoughts below. My desperate act had failed. It had backfired in the worst way imaginable. The next morning I saw Debbie standing by the window, my help me note in her hand. My stomach plummeted. I braced myself for her rage, for screaming in punishment. But she didn't yell. She did something far worse. She turned to me, her eyes welling with crocodile tears, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. How could you do this to me?" she said, holding out the note as if it were a dagger I had plunged into her heart. "After everything I've done for you, I sacrificed everything to be here, and you try to make me out to be some kind of monster?" I was stunned into silence. With a breathtaking evil genius, she had twisted my cry for help into an act of profound betrayal. She, the abuser, was now the victim. I was the guilty one. I couldn't speak. Any explanation would have been useless against her perfect, tear-stained performance. But it seemed my silent prayers had been answered in another unexpected way. That afternoon, the phone rang. This time, Debbie couldn't ignore it. She was standing right beside it, and its shrill ring made her jump. She answered, and I heard her say the name Carol. It was Carol, my old friend from the women's group at church. My heart leaped with a painful, hopeful flutter. Debbie couldn't just hang up. "Hi, Carol," she said, her voice instantly becoming syrupy sweet. She listened for a moment, and then I heard the poison start to drip. "Oh, Mom Margaret, she's been very weak lately. Her memory isn't what it used to be either. She gets confused sometimes, a little paranoid even." I went cold. She was preemptively discrediting me. She was painting me as a senile old woman, planting the seed in Carol's mind that I was losing my wits, neutralizing me before I could even speak a word. To appear gracious and hide her panic, Debbie continued into the phone, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. "A visit? What a wonderful idea! It would do her a world of good to see old friends. How about next Tuesday? Say 2 o'clock?" She hung up and turned to me, smiling a smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "See, I always want what's best for you. Your friend is coming to visit." A warm flicker of hope, something I hadn't felt in so long, ignited in my chest. Tuesday, just 6 days away. I was going to see Carol. I wouldn't be alone. The date, Tuesday at 2 p.m., became my lighthouse, my reason to try and eat a little more, to hold on just a little longer. Hope, however fragile, is like air. You don't realize how desperately you need it until you can't breathe. Debbie began to prepare for the visit with a menacing thoroughness that filled me with dread. She cleaned the house until it sparkled. She even bought a basket of expensive cookies from the best bakery in town. But this time, she didn't just set the stage, she coached the lead actor. "Listen to me," she said on Monday evening, cornering me in my room, all sweetness gone from her voice. "When Carol gets here, you are going to tell her how well I take care of you. You are going to thank me. If you say one stupid thing, Frank will be the first to hear that you've completely lost your mind, and he'll have no choice but to put you in a home. Do you understand me?" The threat was brutally clear. She wasn't just threatening me, she was using my deepest love and my deepest fear as a leash. She knew I would rather die than have Frank bear the burden and the pain of putting his own mother in a strange, sterile place. On that same Monday afternoon, as I was silently counting the hours until Carol's visit, the weather forecast on the little television in my room began to issue urgent scrolling warnings. A massive blizzard, the biggest they'd seen in a decade, was barreling down from the north, heading straight for Wyoming. The weatherman spoke of crippling winds, several feet of snow, and widespread, long-lasting power outages. For most people, it was bad news, an inconvenience. For me, it was an omen. A vague, cold dread began to creep into my mind, tightening its grip on my newfound hope. I looked out the window. The sky was still a clear pale blue, but I could feel a change in the air. A heavy, pregnant stillness had fallen over the ranch. I didn't know it then, but for Debbie, that weather report wasn't a warning. It was an opportunity, a godsend. That evening, Debbie came into my room, her face a perfect mask of false sadness. "I have some bad news, Mom," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed and taking my hand in hers, her touch cold as stone. "I just spoke with Carol. With the blizzard coming, she can't risk driving out here. She said she'll try to reschedule in a few weeks." No, my heart didn't just sink. It plummeted into a dark, cold pit. I knew she was lying. I hadn't heard the phone ring. My hope, which had been a warm, bright flame, was extinguished as if by a sudden gust of icy wind. But what could I do? Accuse her? Give her the very proof she needed to claim I was delusional? I could only nod, my silence a form of surrender. My lighthouse had gone dark. The blizzard hadn't even arrived yet, but it had already become Debbie's accomplice. It had helped her take the final step, to seal this house shut, to turn it into a white tomb where no one would ever hear me scream. The storm came quietly at first, not with a bang, but a whisper, a sky the color of lead, heavy and bruised. Then the wind began to hiss through the pines, carrying the first few flakes, which danced and hesitated in the air like white moths. I sat by the window and watched my world get erased layer by layer. The familiar line of the fence, the dark shape of the barn, the stark pine trees on the ridge, all of it slowly vanished into an endless, shifting, hypnotic white. There's a haunting beauty to falling snow, a silencing of the world, but it only filled me with a primal dread. It felt like the world outside was disappearing, and I was being buried alive in my own home. The wind began to moan across the roof, a low, sorrowful sound, like something weeping for me. And as the cold descended outside, a terrible fever was building inside me. The pressure sore on my back, which had been a quiet, burning torment for weeks, had finally betrayed me. A searing heat radiated through my body, followed by uncontrollable shivers that rattled my bones. My teeth chattered violently, even under the thick blankets. I knew the signs. This wasn't a common cold. This was an infection, spreading through my weakened body. The time bomb inside me had finally detonated. What little strength I had managed to preserve was rapidly evaporating, consumed by the fever that was burning me up from the inside out. My own body had become my enemy. "Debbie!" I called out, my voice a dry, cracking rasp that was barely audible above the growing storm. "Honey, I'm very sick." Debbie came in, her face illuminated by the blue glow of her cell phone. She was probably playing one of her online slot machines, the little spinning wheels a perfect metaphor for her life. "What is it now?" she asked, her voice edged with annoyance. "I have a fever," I gasped. "I'm hot and cold at the same time. I need a doctor." This was no longer a complaint about pain. This was a plea for my life. For the first time, I let the raw, naked fear show in my voice. I didn't care about dignity anymore. I just wanted to live. I looked directly into her eyes, trying to convey the terrible urgency of the situation. "Please, Debbie, I think I'm in real danger." Debbie put her phone down, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked over and placed a hand on my forehead. It was a brief, cool, indifferent touch, a clinical assessment. Then she looked at me, a long, deep, unreadable look. Then she turned and looked out the window at the blizzard, which was now a screaming white fury, a solid wall of motion. The wind flung sheets of snow against the glass like handfuls of gravel, and in that moment, as she stood silhouetted against the white chaos, I saw it in her eyes. Not worry, not panic. I saw a terrifying calm, a cold, clear calculation. "It's just the flu, Mom," she said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "In this weather, an ambulance could never get through. We're trapped. You'll just have to ride it out." She was right. The storm was the perfect excuse, the perfect murder weapon. She didn't have to do a thing. She just had to do nothing. Her passive neglect now became a deliberate, methodical act of murder. "Let me get you some clean sheets. You'll feel better," she said in that same chilling monotone. Then she moved with a terrifying purpose. She stripped the heavy wool blanket, my mother's blanket, the only thing of real warmth I had left, off my body. Instead of replacing it with another, she covered my shivering body with only a single, thin, threadbare cotton sheet. "The blanket's dirty. I'm taking it to be washed," she lied, without blinking, her face a blank mask. And before she left the room, she opened the window, just a crack. A sliver of wind, as sharp and cold as a razor, sliced into the room, carrying the freezing breath of the storm directly to my bed. She was turning my room into a cold, dark grave. Debbie shut the door with a soft click, leaving me alone in the freezing dark. I lay there, shaking uncontrollably, the raging fever and the penetrating cold warring for my body. The wind shrieked louder and louder, like a wild, predatory animal. My world shrank to that sound, to the chattering of my own teeth, and to the terrifying sensation of life slowly, inexorably seeping out of me. My consciousness began to drift, to fray at the edges. I was floating between reality and delirium. I saw John standing at the foot of the bed, looking just as he did the day we met, smiling and holding out his hand to me. "Come on home, sweetheart," he said, his voice a warm and welcome sound. I wanted to go with him. It seemed so much easier, so much more peaceful to let go than to keep fighting in this endless, suffocating white night. I was drifting in a sea of memory, no sense of time or place, just a hazy, fever-induced fog. I could feel John's hand, warm and calloused from a lifetime of work, holding mine as we walked along the banks of the Shoshone River in the fall, the cottonwood leaves like gold coins all around us. I could hear Frank's laughter as a little boy, clear as a bell, echoing across the hayfield as he chased butterflies. The smell of freshly cut alfalfa, my own mother's apple pie cooling on the windowsill, the rich scent of old leather from John's saddle. It all came rushing back, not as a coherent film, but as vivid sensory fragments of a life that was once so full, so real. They weren't sad memories. They were a reminder, a powerful reminder that I was loved, that my life had meaning and purpose before it was reduced to this cold, dark room. Through the fragments of my past, another voice broke through, clear and strong, as if he were standing right beside me. It was Pastor David's. In my mind, I was sitting in my usual wooden pew, the hard oak familiar against my back, listening to his Sunday sermon. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket, he said, his voice booming with a gentle power. Instead, they put it on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. That verse, one I'd heard 100 times, suddenly had a new and urgent meaning. Debbie was trying to put my lamp under a basket, to smother its flame in the cold and the dark. But the purpose of a lamp, its entire reason for being, is to give light, no matter how small or weak the flame. In my fevered state, a moment of absolute clarity pierced the fog. I was that lamp, and I wasn't burned out yet. An idea, a purpose cut through the fever like a bolt of lightning. The ledger, my book of truth, sitting in the drawer of John's desk. I pictured Debbie finding it after I was gone. I could see her face triumphant as she tossed it into the fireplace. I could see the pages filled with my truth curling, blackening, and turning to ash. And my story, my pain, her crime, would all disappear forever, as if it had never happened. Frank would never know the truth. He would live the rest of his life with the crushing guilt of not being there for his mother's final moments, never knowing he had been deceived. That thought, the thought that she would not only steal my life, but also steal my truth from my son, was unbearable. It was a violation worse than death itself, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, a primal energy I didn't know I possessed. I began to fight back against the encroaching darkness. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't even sit up. My body was a leaden weight, but I could move. With a tremendous soul-deep effort that sent waves of pain through my infected body, I managed to bend my knees just an inch, then another. My whole body screamed in protest, but I ignored it. I willed myself to curl into a tight fetal position, a simple primal act of self-preservation, to conserve what little warmth my body was still producing. Then, my eyes fixed on the thin cotton sheet. My fingers were stiff and nearly numb with cold, but I forced them to grasp the edge of the fabric. I pulled, millimeter by painful millimeter. An eternity seemed to pass just to draw the sheet up to my chin. It was the smallest of victories, but in that dark, cold room, it felt like conquering a mountain. As I lay there, Shivering uncontrollably but curled into a ball of sheer will, something happened. The storm outside reached its absolute peak. I heard a loud pop from the direction of the road, and the entire house plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness and a sudden, shocking silence. The power was out. All that was left was the horrifying, disembodied sound of the wind. I closed my eyes, thinking this was the end, but then I saw it, a thin sliver of light, moving unsteadily under the crack of my door. It disappeared, then reappeared. A flashlight. Debbie was up. She was walking through the house. She wasn't sleeping. She was checking on her work, perhaps, checking to see if I was dead yet. That little bobbing beam of light, instead of terrifying me, became an anchor for my fading consciousness. It was proof that I wasn't entirely alone with my death. My tormentor was still there. That moving light sealed my resolve. This was no longer a desperate, hopeless struggle for survival. It became a mission. I stopped praying for God to save me. Instead, in the silent darkness of my own mind, I made a promise, a silent vow to John, to his memory, and to my beloved son, Frank. I will not let her win, John. Do you hear me? That devil will not win. Your story will not end in this room, Frank. Your mother's story does not end like this. I will live. I will live to tell you the truth. That was the moment everything changed. The fever still raged. The cold was still a physical pain, but I had found my reason to hold on. Not just to survive the night, but to reclaim my truth. My battle that night was fought without weapons or words. It was a silent, internal conversation with my own failing body, a test of pure, raw endurance. The delirium was gone, burned away by my new purpose. My mind was strangely, icily clear. I focused on each ragged breath, making it a rhythm to cling to. Inhale, I thought of my promise. Exhale, I pushed back the cold. I remembered what John had taught me about surviving a Wyoming winter, lessons learned from decades on this unforgiving land. Never fall asleep. He'd always say if we got caught in a sudden storm while checking the cattle. Keep moving, even if it's just your toes. Keep your mind working. Sing a song in your head if you have to. I followed his instructions from across the Great Divide. I tensed the muscles in my legs, then relaxed them. I recited my favorite psalms in my head, the words of familiar comfort. I wasn't fighting the storm anymore. I was learning to exist inside it, to endure it. And then it came. Not a sudden change, but a slow, gradual, merciful shift. The screaming of the wind softened to a low, mournful whistle. Through the crack in the window, the inky blackness of the night began to fade to a deep, bruised gray. Dawn. I had made it through the night. I slowly, painfully turned my head to look outside. The world was utterly transformed. Everything was covered in a thick, pristine, impossibly deep blanket of snow. The first weak rays of sunlight hit the snow crystals, making the entire landscape glitter with a breathtaking, heartbreaking beauty. That beauty, that clean and silent perfection, in such stark contrast to the ugliness and filth inside this room, gave me a strange sense of peace, a feeling that the world was still out there, and it was still good, and it was worth fighting for. Into the profound morning quiet, a new sound emerged. It wasn't the wind. It was a deep, steady, mechanical rumble from far away. At first I couldn't place it, but it grew louder, more distinct. A snowplow. They were clearing the highway. That sound, just noise to most people, and annoyance on a winter morning was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was the sound of the outside world coming back. It was the sound of life, of order, of civilization breaking through the white walls of the prison Debbie had created. Hope was no longer just an internal flicker. It was a physical, audible thing getting closer, one scraped foot of asphalt at a time. I wasn't the only one who heard it. I heard Debbie's footsteps in the hall, no longer calm and measured, but hurried and anxious. I heard the scrape of a curtain being pulled back in the living room, then her rush to the kitchen window. She was panicking. Her perfect fortress of ice was about to be breached. I heard her muttering to herself, just loud enough for me to make out the words through the thin walls. Damn it. So soon. Frank's going to call. The hourglass had been flipped. Time was no longer her ally. Now it was working against her. The warden had become a prisoner, trapped by the very storm she had used as her weapon. My door opened. Debbie entered, carrying a glass of water. She stopped dead in the doorway when she saw me, not only alive, but awake, and watching her with clear eyes. A flicker of pure, unadulterated shock crossed her face before she could mask it with a brittle, ghastly smile. You're awake. See? I told you you'd pull through. The storm's almost over. She was trying to reset things, to slip back into her role as the devoted caregiver. But something had changed irrevocably. My eyes. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. It was a gaze that held no fear, no pleading, just a quiet, clear-eyed stillness. A stillness that said, I know. And it unnerved her to her core. I knew I was still incredibly weak, hanging on by a thread. A direct confrontation now, and she could easily finish what she had started and claim I'd finally succumbed to the flu. I needed to buy time. I needed to regain an ounce of strength. Debbie, recovering her composure, offered me the glass of water. Here, you must be dehydrated. I looked at it. It was just lukewarm tap water, but it was water. It was life. I slowly reached out my still trembling hand and took the glass. I drank slowly, my eyes never leaving hers. It was an act of acceptance, but it was not an act of surrender. I was taking the bare minimum of help from my own enemy to fuel myself for what I knew was coming. And Debbie, watching me drain the glass, didn't realize that she wasn't just giving me water. She was handing me back my strength, drop by drop. A dry click echoed through the quiet house, followed immediately by the low, familiar hum of the refrigerator starting up in the kitchen. The power was back, and almost immediately, as if on cue, the phone began to ring, its shrill, piercing sound an assault on the silence. It made both of us jump. Debbie rushed to answer it. I didn't have to guess who it was. It was Frank. I held my breath, straining to hear. Debbie's voice was a chaotic scramble, a desperate, frantic attempt to sound normal and in control. Oh, Frank, thank God! You got through. The storm was just awful, a total nightmare. Mom? She's okay, just very weak from the flu. No, don't you worry. I have everything under control. She was talking too fast, tripping over her words, trying to patch together her shattered performance. But the raw panic in her voice was a crack in the facade she couldn't hide. On the other end of the line, thousands of miles away, Frank must have sensed it. My son is an engineer. He's a practical man who believes in logic and data, not in panicked reassurances. He knew his 76-year-old mother, in frail health, had just been through a historic blizzard and a power outage. Debbie's hollow, frantic words weren't enough. I heard her voice shift from reassurance to pleading. No, you don't need to do that, honey. I've got it under control, really. It's not necessary, I promise. Then she went silent, listening, her face growing pale. Finally, she spoke, her voice hollowed out, utterly defeated. Yes, yes, I understand. I'll be here. She hung up the phone, her hand shaking so badly she could barely place the receiver back in its cradle. I knew what my son had done. He hadn't believed her. He had taken action. Debbie stood motionless by the phone for a long time, as if turned to stone. Then, like a cornered, caged animal, she began to pace the living room. I could hear her frantic footsteps, back and forth on the old wooden floors. I heard her muttering curses under her breath. Then there was a loud crash. She must have thrown something against the wall. The perfect smiling facade had completely shattered. All that was left was a panicked criminal, realizing the trap she had so carefully set for me was now closing in on her. The sheriff. Frank had called the sheriff's department to do a wellness check. That was a reality she couldn't lie her way out of. She could fool her husband over the phone, but she couldn't fool the law standing on her doorstep. In her final, desperate panic, she burst into my room. There was no time left for acting, no energy for deceit. Listen to me, she hissed, her face a twisted mask of fury and fear. She pulled the heavy wool blanket from the closet and threw it over me. You will tell them you had the flu. You will tell them I took excellent care of you. If you say one word, I will tell them you're crazy, that you did all this to yourself. It was one last, desperate threat. But I just looked at her, and I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, just a vast, empty calm. I had been to the edge of death and back. Her words were just noise, empty of all power. Her control had vanished with the storm. I remained silent, and my silence terrified her more than any protest. And then I heard it. A distant sound, just a faint, mournful whine at first. But it grew steadily louder, a siren slicing through the vast, white silence of the post-storm world. Closer and closer, its wail echoing off the snowy hills. A sheriff's car. For Debbie, it was the death knell of her freedom. For me, it was the sweetest, most beautiful sound on earth. It was the sound of the truth arriving. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound that meant my long, terrible nightmare was finally ending. Tears began to stream down my cheeks, hot against my cold skin. But they were tears of pure, unadulterated, overwhelming relief. The siren cut out abruptly, right in my front yard. A tense, heavy silence fell over the house, and then 3 knocks on the front door. Thump, thump, thump. Firm, loud, and full of an authority that could not be denied. Each knock was like a hammer blow on the coffin of her crimes. I looked at my daughter-in-law. Her face was chalk white, a grotesque mask of terror. She stood frozen in the middle of the room. There was nowhere left to run. The play was over. That door, the one that had locked me away from the world, was now my door to freedom, and it was about to be opened. The door opened, and a blast of cold, clean air swept in. But this time it brought no fear, only the scent of moist and wet earth. Sheriff Thompson stepped inside, a big man with a kind, weathered face I'd known since he was a boy in town, bagging groceries at the general store. "Morning, Mrs. O'Connell," he started to say, but his voice trailed off as his eyes landed on me. His professional demeanor vanished, replaced by a look of pure shock as he took in my condition, the state of my room, the cold air still seeping from the window. Debbie immediately began her babbling defense. "Oh, Sheriff, thank heavens you're here. My mother-in-law has a terrible flu. I've been doing my best, but she's so weak." But Sheriff Thompson wasn't looking at her. His eyes, full of a dawning, terrible understanding, were locked on mine. "Margaret," he asked, his voice gentle but firm, cutting through her lies, "what's been going on here?" Debbie shot me a final, venomous glare, one last attempt to intimidate me into silence. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. I took a slow, shallow breath, gathering what little strength I had left in my ravaged body. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't list her crimes. I slowly lifted my trembling, bony hand and pointed toward John's study. I looked Sheriff Thompson straight in the eye, and I said a single clear word: "Ledger." My voice was a weak, hoarse whisper, but in the silence of that room it echoed louder than a shout. It was all I needed to say. My story wouldn't end in a frantic, emotional accusation, but in a quiet, carefully recorded truth. The deputy with him, a young man I didn't know, went into the study and came back a moment later with John's leather-bound book. I then gestured with my eyes toward the cushion of my wheelchair. The deputy lifted it and found the crumpled, forgotten casino receipt. Sheriff Thompson took them both. He opened the ledger, his large, gentle hands turning the pages, reading my shaky, arthritic script. The atmosphere in the room shifted with every page he turned. Each line was an undeniable fact, a nail in her coffin. Dates, events, the missed medication, the sold tractor, the dead phone. He didn't need to hear another word from me. He closed the book with a soft, final thud. He looked up at Debbie, and in that one long, silent look, her sentence was passed. "Ms. O'Connell," he said, his voice now cold as the winter ice, "you need to come with us." For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax, and I could breathe. I was taken to the hospital in Cody. The doctors said I had a severe infection from the pressure sore and was suffering from advanced malnutrition. But, they said, I would recover. The first phone call I took was from Frank. My son was sobbing, deep, gut-wrenching sobs of a man whose world had been shattered. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have known." Debbie had called him right after her arrest, spewing a final torrent of lies about my senility and her heroic efforts. But the sheriff had already sent Frank photos of the pages from my ledger. The truth, in my own handwriting, had won. "It's not your fault, son," I told him, my voice still weak but steady and sure. "She fooled us both, but it's over now. It's over." In the silence that followed, I knew the wound in our family would take a long, long time to heal, but it would heal. The truth was the first step. A few months passed. Spring came to Wyoming, a season of fierce and tender rebirth. The snow all melted, revealing the first green shoots of new grass, impossibly bright against the damp brown earth. I was slowly recovering too. After the hospital, I spent some time in the physical rehabilitation center learning to be strong again. Frank took an extended leave from his job to be with me, his quiet, steady presence a healing balm. He was handling the legal proceedings, ensuring Debbie would never control a single acre of this ranch again. Every day, he would wheel me out onto the porch to sit in the sun, the warmth on my skin, the sound of the meadowlarks returning to the fields, the clean smell of damp earth after a light rain. Those simple, beautiful things felt more precious than gold. Like the land itself, I was coming back to life. Today, I'm sitting on the porch swing again, in my wheelchair, with my mother's old wool blanket across my lap. Frank is out in the distance, near the barn, mending a section of a fence that the blizzard damaged, his back strong and steady in the afternoon sunlight. I look out over the land my family has poured its sweat and tears and love into for 3 generations. I was once a prisoner in my own home, but now I am its keeper again. I am a survivor. The storm came, and it did not break me. It only showed me that true strength isn't about never falling or never feeling weak. It's about the quiet, stubborn courage to get back up, even if all you can do is write a single line of truth in the dark. The truth has a weight all its own. And eventually, no matter how deeply it is buried, it always finds its way to the light. You know, so often when we sit together, the stories just start to flow like a stream. Today, I've shared a piece of my heart, and now I would be so honored to hear a piece of yours. You know, sometimes it's just a simple click of a button on a screen, a like, a subscribe, or a share. To many, it might seem like a small passing gesture, but to me, and to other quiet voices that need to be shared, every single one of those clicks is a small light in the darkness. It's a quiet way of saying, I see you, I hear you, your story matters. It reminds me that we are not invisible. A simple click from you is a powerful statement of support for me, giving me the encouragement to continue sharing these stories. After my story was told, something changed in me. For weeks, all I wanted was for someone to hear my voice. And now that you have, I realize that what I want most is to hear yours. Down below, in the comment section, I would be so honored if you would share a piece of your story with me. Tell me about a time you felt unheard. Tell me about a passion that others may have dismissed as silly. Or tell me about a moment you found your strength, even in the smallest, quietest way. I will read them. I will carry them with me, because your stories matter. We want to build Sapphire Revenge into a community where we can share the stories that come from deep within our hearts. I know that you too have private stories that can sometimes be difficult to share with family or friends. I am here to listen, to share in your joys and your sorrows, because we all have the right to be respected and to be heard. And if you don't have a sad story like the one I've been through, please share your happy stories. Tell me about a joy you experienced today. Please share it with me. It will be a tremendous source of encouragement, helping me and the other viewers watching this to heal, to find faith, and to find motivation in our lives. If you're watching this on a television, please don't hesitate to pick up your phone and search for my channel on Sapphire Revenge. I truly hope to share these feelings with you. Let's build a community together where we can share our emotions with sincerity. Let's make this a place where we listen to each other. A place where no woman has to feel that her life, her struggles, and her triumphs are invisible. Thank you once again for sitting here with me. It means the world.